We now go live to the UN as the 77th General Assembly takes place. Also, Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso, addresses the Assembly. Let's listen.
President, Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. President Shaba Kuroshi, at the outset, I should like to congratulate you warmly for your election to the presidency of the 77th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. I am sure that your great experience, knowledge of the United Nations system, and your commitment to multilateral diplomacy will ensure the success of your mandate. Allow me to assure you of the full support of the delegation of Burkina Faso in exercising your mandate and achieving success in your work. I also congratulate your predecessor, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, for the remarkable way in which he presided over the work of the 76th session of the General Assembly. To Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, I hereby reaffirm the gratitude of Burkina Faso for his constant commitment, always resolute and renewed, to achieve peace, security and development. I seize this opportunity to commend the holding of the Summit on Transforming Education, which allowed for mobilization amongst all stakeholders in the world of education, and I cherish the hope that commitment on all sides towards implementing the conclusions of this summit will contribute to significantly accelerating progress towards high-quality education for all, particularly in the countries of the South. President, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of the 77th session of the General Assembly is a new era of solutions to interlocking challenges. And this reveals the urgency of the historic responsibility of economic, social and political protagonists. The world is facing numerous challenges. As we are gradually recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, other scourges such as terrorism, conflict between and within states, and the humanitarian and food crises resulting from this, climate change and its effects are continuing to hit our daily lives. And these scourges remind us of our individual and collective fragility and the interdependence of countries and peoples, and the imperious need for international solidarity. If we wish to preserve humanity from a collective and unavoidable peril, we must not ignore this call. President, ladies and gentlemen, the end of the Cold War allowed us to dream and to hope for the advent of a consensual world faced based around the cardinal values of peace, justice, liberty, democracy, and solidarity. But this was not the case, because unfortunately, for some time now, we have seen a resurgence of nationalism and inward-lookingness around the planet, a reversal of liberty and democracy, a will on the part of some countries to impose their vision upon others, to give in to rivalries and confrontation between powers for political, military, or economic control of certain parts of the world. In short, members of the international community are talking about their great vision of a unipolar, single-coloured world which is in line with their ideologies and interests. It is crucial that we stand up to this and develop the strength within ourselves not to succumb to such temptations. We should rather ensure we have a spirit of solidarity so that the diversity of the world is preserved and that the principle of the interdependence of peoples, where everybody can contribute to managing world affairs, becomes a reality. Burkina Faso fully believes that chances for the survival of humanity lie in accepting and properly making use of our differences and diversity. This should not be a factor leading to antagonism or hostility, but rather the ideal opportunity to find complementarity and solidarity. And this is being given to us on a plate to promote peaceful coexistence and sustainable development. President, ladies and gentlemen, the main challenges our world is facing today are well known. They consist mainly of peace and security, democracy and sustainable development, climate change and environment, health and education. We can, together and only together, meet these challenges. To do this, we need to move beyond our own individual interests, which often lead to crises, in order to ensure a serene relationship with one another. I therefore invite all actors and protagonists of the international community, whether they come from the north or the south and whatever their levels of political, economic or military power, to join in with this movement. President, ladies and gentlemen, for several years now, a number of questions have been returning regularly to the agenda of the General Assembly. These include the questions of Palestine, Western Sahara, debt, climate change, the embargo against Cuba, the war in Ukraine, and Security Council reform. In resolving each of these questions, Burkina Faso recommends the preeminence of the rule of law, justice and equity, and the triumph of good sense. President, ladies and gentlemen, I should like now to say a few words about the situation of my country and the ideals of the political transition underway there at the moment, in line with the very relevant theme of this session of the General Assembly and the objectives of the Charter of the United Nations. On the 24th of January 2022, a group of young patriots had to stand up and assume their responsibilities in the public management of state affairs. Given the problems facing the current governance, increasing insecurity in our country, and the gradual continued disintegration of the state by setting up a democratically elected but chaotic regime. Far be it from us to justify ourselves or to encourage practices of destabilization or the violation of constitutional order. Indeed, whilst the movement of the 24th of January is illegal in absolute terms and perhaps reprehensible in terms of the principles held dear to the United Nations and the international community as a whole, we do believe that this interruption of constitutional order, given the prevailing situation, was necessary and indispensable. It was, above all, an issue of survival for our nation. Which is why this movement, centered upon safeguarding and recasting our territory, met true popular legitimacy within public opinion of our country. This enthusiasm and public support still prevail with regard to the transitional authorities who I have now been leading for 8 months. Indeed, the security situation in Burkina Faso began to deteriorate in 2015, with this process culminating in 2020 and 2021. The recent events causing upheavals in the democratic process of my country are the result of a lack of responses to the security crisis and to disastrous political governance, which led inter alia to the greatest number of internally displaced persons in the political history of our country and our sub-region. That is 1,520,012 people on the 31st of August, by the 31st of August 2022, as well as a humanitarian and food crisis which were unprecedented in our history, and the closing of several thousand schools and 500,000 pupils deprived of teaching and education, and an economic abyss caused by the slowdown or indeed the halting of a number of economic activities such as mining, tourism, the catering sector, agriculture, livestock, transport, and so on. These difficulties, described so briefly here, are part of a sub-regional security context which is affected by attacks from numerous terrorist groups in the Sahel, particularly the central Sahel region, which includes Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Nevertheless, in order to tackle this problem, the transitional government is counting on new endogenous initiatives and has assumed its responsibilities by establishing a plan of action based around 4 strategic objectives, as follows. Firstly, combating terrorism and restoring the integrity of the territory. Secondly, a response to the humanitarian crisis. Thirdly, the restructuring of the state and an improvement in governance. And finally, national reconciliation and social cohesion. In order to achieve these strategic objectives, the transitional government has taken the following major initiatives. Firstly, the reorganization of the national security mechanism and strong, robust actions on the ground against terrorism and armed groups. Combating radicalization, hate speech, and the stigmatization of certain communities. Implementing a policy of de-radicalization and socio-professional reintegration for former combatants from armed groups. support for the socio-economic reintegration of internally displaced persons and those affected by terrorism. And finally, combating corruption, promoting justice and equity, and education around peace and citizenship. However, a simple determination or will in Burkina Faso to combat terrorism will not be enough alone to produce lasting or irreversible effects in this area. The support of the international community is crucial and highly expected in this regard. This support is all the more urgent because the geographical position of Burkina makes it into a linchpin for halting the expansion of terrorism towards coastal countries such as Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana and Togo. President, ladies and gentlemen, the stability, security and peace of the Sahel are not only a matter for the countries of that region, in the sense that the prevailing situation in the countries of the Sahel is the result, I recall, of a migration of the terrorist phenomenon from the north to the south of the continent. What is happening today in the Sahel, because of its cross-border effects, is a problem which imperils international peace and security. It is therefore imperative for the international community to take greater account of this and tackle it. Efforts deployed thus far are welcome, but fall below expectations regarding the realities on the ground. I should like here to welcome the initiative of the President of the African Union and the Secretary General of the United Nations to mandate President Mamadou Issoufou to lead a joint strategic evaluation mission between the African Union and the UN on security in the Sahel. This mission should result in establishing recommendations as to how best to bolster the international response to the security crisis in the Sahel, with a view to achieving a global and enduring solution. I call upon our bilateral and multilateral technical and financial partners to support the Transitional Action Plan adopted on the 6th of May. Burkina Faso hopes to receive support from these development partners so as to close the gap of around $4.575 billion out of a total budget of $18.064 billion. The government has also launched the establishment of a transitional emergency program, which will be devoted to priority projects of an innovative nature with a great impact on the daily lives of our people. And we are counting upon the mobilization of our friends and partners to do this. President, ladies and gentlemen, the transitional authorities in Burkina Faso are aware of our responsibilities to the Burkinabe people and our duties to the international community. Make no mistake about this. We will not evade these responsibilities. The transitional authorities are aware of their responsibilities, therefore, and achieved and managed on the 3rd of July to reach a dynamic commitment with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, regarding a timeline for the transition, which will last for 24 months from the 1st of July 2022 onwards, and also the need to establish a follow-up, a monitoring and evaluation mechanism regarding the transition, and security indicators, as well as the return of state services to occupied areas and the return of displaced persons. I fully believe that significant progress in these areas will allow us to put in place conditions favourable to the holding of credible, transparent elections with a view to a return to normal constitutional order. Such progress will only be possible thanks to significant support from the international community, upon whom I call from this rostrum. I also seize the opportunity offered to me here to thank all our bilateral, multilateral and private technical and financial partners who have been supporting us or who have promised to support us in the future. I should also like to invite those who have not yet done so to take the decision to join us and to support us in our reconstruction and in consolidating our economic, social and security fabric. President, ladies and gentlemen, the people of our countries, whether they be rich or poor, powerful or weak, need a safe, peaceful world where they can all live serenely and fully exercise their rights. However, the Sahel region today is a hotbed of armed groups who are holding sway throughout the world. These groups are a threat, not only upon the security of this region, but also upon the security of the rest of the world. If nothing is done to come to their aid decisively and urgently in the countries of this region, we run the risk of a resurgence of terrorism in the countries of the Gulf of Guinea, and then in the rest of the world, starting in Europe, which is the closest continent to Africa. No precautions or prevention measures will prevent terrorism from then crossing the Atlantic if the Sahel is abandoned. And nothing at all will be able to stop the youth in the Sahel countries and its surroundings from giving in to the temptation of perilous immigrations to Europe through the Sahara and the Mediterranean if this youth has no longer any hope by staying at home. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Sahel is facing many afflictions due to terrorism and has become an arena for sterile rivalry and greed, which are exacerbating this situation. Rather than just looking at this bleak spectacle, the countries of the Sahara rather require solidarity and assistance. Assistance, but not just any assistance and aid. This is the kind of assistance which allows us to move away from aid. Aid killing aid in a way and this is the kind of assistance which is in line with our convictions and respects our dignity. President, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I should like once again to invite all those in the international community to exhibit greater solidarity to one another. This is the best way to meet the challenges we face in our time and to preserve the interests of all. Raoul Follereau said that nobody has the right to be happy alone. So let us ensure that there are no more ill-fed, uneducated children, that there are no young people without training and without jobs, that there are no longer those living in rural areas without lands allowing them to live with dignity, that there are no longer workers who are oppressed and lose their rights, that abundance for some does not mean lean years for others, that force does not prevail over truth and justice, and finally that our selfishness never predominates over dignity for humankind and for all peoples. I can assure you that Burkina Faso will spare no efforts to provide its contribution to building a better, more peaceful and prosperous world in solidarity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President.
We were watching live statements of Paul Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso. The top